Hi, Steve. It's been a little while. Thanks for doing this. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Hi, Whitney. Great to be invited and really appreciate all the work you're doing to really help the community stay connected and to heal.
hmm Yeah, so we did a roundtable a while ago. That was at the very beginning of this, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think a couple of years ago, and a lot of water under the bridge since then. My hair's a little longer than it was that at that time. So it's been an interesting exercise to go through and experience. I realize, to a very small degree, what women go through with all the parents. Jared, in his
Mm.
interview, talked about having a beard as a worker and all that he got on that front. And so this is a little bit of experiencing that and being able to relate to a small degree. I feel the judgment from it, it's in my head at least. It's kind of a healthy exercise to realize how toxic and difficult it, even to a small degree, how women go through in a church that's so
hmm
legalistic when it comes to appearance, when it's just such a mundane thing,
hmm
your hair length.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate seeing you. I appreciate to see all of the different people I've talked to over the years and how people have evolved even in their appearances. I think it's kind of cool, people in the church and who have left
Mhm.
slightly loosening up on some of those things. Yeah, it's great to see you. And I think it would be awesome if you would give us a quick introduction for maybe people that didn't see the roundtable or haven't been watching the chats, because I know you are involved quite a bit on sharing your opinion and your experience. So I'd like to give you a chance to introduce yourself to people that might not know you.
Yeah, I'm definitely far more comfortable in written form, being public than on camera.
hmm
But anyway, yeah, my name is Steve Paddon. I live in California. My association with the church, what we call it, referred to as the Truth, and publicly it's the Two by Two Church. I was, born and raised a deep family with roots in going clear back to the early 20th century. Some members of my family had the first convention in California, and literally there has been thousands of people that I'm blood related to as part of the church. So has was part of it myself until 2024, and kind of explaining, that process is a little bit complicated, but really was on the front lines of the crisis response in early 2023 when the Dean Brewer news came out, was asked to help by the workers in the region I live in to develop policies and standards that were rolled out pretty quickly, but also was not really happy with the overall response in that I didn't feel like it was nearly enough to just come up with policies when what they were responding to was a crisis that had been going on for decades, that had been covered up. And so, like, to not acknowledge that that had been a problem, like like just to really have a full reckoning of what had happened and be honest about it, fully transparent, just didn't seem like an outcome that was going to result in a healing of the community. And that's the reality. It didn't heal the community. It was very divisive. And so ultimately, I kept raising my concerns and was effectively challenging authority on decisions. And that's not really an accepted behavior in the church. And eventually
hmm
was excommunicated in early 2024 by the field workers just cutting me off, or my family off, whole family, like with not telling us where meetings were, just not any communications. And so it was clear we weren't welcome, and that was the end of our association. But I was an elder of a union meeting at that time, and we had responded to our own group of people that were meeting in our home, letting them know we would ensure the safety of our meeting. Visitors would be vetted, and that acknowledged that nobody had any accusations that were currently members. There were children in our meeting, including my own. So we were committed to being safe. But when the FBI went public with their investigation, we just couldn't, in good conscience, keep the meeting in their home. This was an active investigation into child sex trafficking, and it was clear like this is beyond the pale. And so we gave up our meeting at that point. We didn't officially exit that point, but we gave up our meeting, and that was shortly before them kicking us out. But it was, clearly we had serious reservations, and so yeah, we gave up our meeting before that happened.
hmm At this point, would you like to talk a little bit about how your activism went from, as you say, being in the front lines of working with the workers, being asked to help with policy? How did that transition into your activism more currently?
Yeah, first maybe I'll back up a little bit, like how I ended up there. Like I don't see myself as a person that's an activist, or even confrontational. like I never thought I'd be doing what I was doing now, like in my wildest dreams. And you probably the same way. Like, how did I end up
Yeah.
here is a regular thought. And so I've thought a lot about like what are my motivations? Why did I end up where I'm at? And it was actually a lonely spot. Like one of the things that happened early in the crisis is I'd look around and I didn't see many of my male peers on the front lines of the crisis. And it was quite alarming. Like there were so many women that were very brave and a lot of them were survivors. Some of them weren't, raising their voices and saying this isn't right. Like this can't stand. But there weren't a lot of men on those front lines, and it was weird and lonely to be in that position. And I couldn't understand like why am I receiving this differently? Why is my behavior different? And it was something that I had to kind of examine. And I think there's a few reasons why that happened. One of them was that most of my adult life, I lived with an anxiety disorder, and it was pretty severe to the point of borderline agoraphobic at times, which means you like can't leave your house. And it was pretty well hidden. Not a lot of people knew that I was struggling with it that badly, but it was severe enough that I would, pretty randomly have panic attacks that would escalate, and I would literally pass out. And I would wake up with EMTs over the top of me and not understand why, what had just happened. And it took me a while to even figure out that it was panic attacks. That's what was causing it. For a while, I just thought something was drastically wrong that they couldn't diagnose. So then I treated it with medication and therapy, and it got manageable over the years. But what happened after the crisis came to light, I really examined like what is going on here? Like why do I have so much anxiety? Like I thought maybe it's just a genetic thing. And there might be some genetics involved. But one of the things I examined was just the idea that we have a conditionally loving God, and that is taught in the church. Like it's very much a conditionally loving God, and that's a scary thing, especially with people that are sensitive to that. And so I realized like that's super harmful to me, especially. I realized it was harmful to my father, and I was realized it was harmful to my kids. I talked to my children about it, and they too had the same anxiety. And so I was like, that is not something I want to live with. Like in those throes of a panic attack, I'd literally not want to be alive. I just felt like if I was dead, it'd finally be over. And like, how does that make sense? Like here, the most precious thing I have is being alive, and yet I don't want it because life is living hell at times. And why is that? And that was the root of it, is like living in fear of what is going to happen if I die. And when I decided, like, I'm not going to live that way anymore, I'm not going to live with fear. These are constructs. And literally, that anxiety disorder dissipated like overnight. Like, it was just wild how
Mm.
just the root of it was an idea that had been planted in me as a kid. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. I'm believing it's not true. And the outcome of that is good mental health. Like that's the fruit of it is discarding that. So that was one of the motivations that was unique to my experience, I think largely. I think there's lots of anxiety and depression that are a struggle in the church, but mine was pretty extreme. I think because of a combined physiological condition that caused me to actually black out. Like that's not very common. But
Mhm.
it was super dangerous. Like I could be driving down the road and have a panic attack escalate and literally like it didn't happen fortunately, but I was worried about that happening and like I'd kill myself, right? Like it was super dangerous. Once I found a solution for it, I was like, this is miraculous. Like I no longer have to live this way. I would call it a revelation. Maybe that's not the right word, but you actually get to choose what you're afraid of. You get to choose whether you decide to take on that fear. And there's so many forces, people politically and religiously want you to fear certain things, and they're rooted largely in wanting to manipulate people in a certain direction. I realize I get to choose whether I'm going to be afraid of the things that people want me to be afraid of, or for whatever reason, or maybe sharing in their fears. Right now, I don't really want to own any of them, and that was the outcome of that. And then the second thing was that, how to explain this? Like we were in a church that called itself the truth. It's just a really interesting thing to think about because what is true and what you believe is true actually have no relevance. They're not connected at all. Like just because you believe something is true doesn't have any correlation to it's actually true or not. And when it
Mm.
comes to things of faith, whether they're true or not isn't provable. Like that's why it's faith. So,
Yeah.
so to even call something truth that's faith-based is inherently something that you choose to believe or not. And so I felt like when I was deconstructing, like, okay, what do I now believe? Because clearly there's some problems with what I subscribed to before that had some really bad outcomes. And so I realized it's not something I can just examine kind of empirically, okay, this is true and this is not. And so instead, I measure it by what are the outcomes of the thing that I believe in. And if the outcomes are, it has positive things and net positive things for me emotionally and spiritually, then I'll take them on. If they are negative, then I'm out. And that was the reality of what was coming to the church. Like as I looked at the overall cost benefit analysis of that experience, what the outcomes were, and learning more about the overall problems that were being kind of covered and how much of it had been buried and trying to hide what was ugly and only look at what are the good things. That's not an honest response. And so going forward, that was my has been my principle. Like I don't have a lot of things I can share with like, well, this is the thing I'm convinced about, but I am convinced that I should live my life measuring things by the outcomes of whatever I subscribe to. So that has led me to some things, one of them being the charity work. And one of the things that came from that was the idea that, and maybe it's just like humanity over ideology. Like one of the things that I realized the church community did was they picked and choose who they loved and they put boundaries down, which isn't what Jesus taught. Like when he said love your neighbor, the immediate response was, well, who's my neighbor, right? That was the
Mhm.
ask. And it was like, no, you don't get to pick who your neighbors are. Like that's just putting boundaries, and that's human tribalism. That's the toxic thing of religion that has always existed in every religion, that we are different and
Yep.
we're better and we're gonna not love you and not care about you. And that's not okay.
Mm,
That's literally what Jesus taught. Like that's not, you don't get to pick. You be kind and love everybody. That's what you're supposed to do. And
mm,
yet, here was a response, a crisis response, people leaving the church, and the boundaries of who I love were fixed on that. Like, well, if you're out, good riddance. And if you're in, then you're in the borders of my love as part of the church. I don't subscribe to that. And so now it's kind of the burden on me that I don't believe that. I do believe that we should love our neighbors and care about them. And so how do I live that? And that's one of the cases of like, okay, well, I can't have that same response. I can't build my own borders about who I decide is okay to love or not. And so part of that is has led me into the charity work and kind of leaning into that. Maybe just kind of explain a little more. Like I've been horrified by the response of the church in general to the survivors. And one of the things is like a lot of the dialogue, especially now, is that there's lots of accusations that are false, it's overblown. It's just people wanting to destroy God's true way. And those statements are really harmful to the people that have been harmed. And it
mhm.
doubles down on the harm that's already been wielded on them by the church. Like the story of the Good Samaritan has been used a lot by those that have been trying to examine the response. And it's in my mind, the analogy that the church response is actually worse than the Good Samaritan story. Like it's as if the priest and the Levite walked by the man in the ditch and said, hey, I think you're faking it. I don't think you're actually hurt. And you weren't actually robbed. You didn't have any money in the first place. Like you're lying about actually having anything that's been taken from you. It's such a horrific response to the survivors of minimizing that their complaints are even real when they're lying there in the ditch. And so like that's a fruit of ideology over humanity. Like it's so important for you to uphold an idea. You need it to be true. And even if this evidence is counter to what you want to believe is true, then you dismiss the evidence. And the net result, the outcome of that is hurting people that already hurt and making it worse. It's just unbelievable. Like I don't understand how people are okay with that. So if I'm going to have an honest response, what is my response? And one of those things is that in late 2023, there was a group of people that I knew well in the California region mostly, initially anyway, that wanted to help, realizing that the need was great, and the need on two fronts. One is the survivor front, and two, that former workers also were really tragically treated and devastated. Their lives were
Mm,
absolutely devastated. And so today that we started that, created a 501c3, formally got it completed in early 2024. And today we're helping 35 survivors get therapy a month currently, and then 20 former workers. Our spend is 30,000 a month and about 50-50
mhm,
split between those two cohorts of people. Like that's unbelievable. Like we
mhm.
had last month 30,000 come in, we got 30,000 going out. Like the charity response has matched, like been able to enable us to operate. We have some buffer, but it's also if you told said I'd be working with charity, spending this kind of money on harm that the church I was part of had done to people, like I would be blown away. Like I wouldn't believe it. But that's a reality, and we're not the only ones doing it. There's three other charities, mostly focused on survivor care. Some of them are funded by the worker trust funds. Ours is not. But I think I don't know their books, but I estimate we're probably in the 30,000-40,000 range total collectively spending on survivor care. What really is needed is to really envelop the people that have been harmed and show they care, that we have their back, that we love them, and we want them to heal. And that isn't happening. I mean, that is happening to some degree, not within the church. The church can't be honest about how severe the harm is. And that is what would really enable these people to move forward much more rapidly than just saying, oh, well, go get a professional help and
Mhm.
good luck. That's what I struggle with. Like, it's great we're able to do this, but it's very lacking in its overall need for what these people deserve.
Not to mention stopping the abuse and the problems from happening and continue to happen in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's really demoralizing to put so much work into a charity when the bleeding hasn't been stopped.
Hmm. Yeah.
So the survivor front has had a like is pretty well understood. The former worker one is not. And I want to talk a little bit about the former worker front and what happens to work people that were in the work and that leave. And first of all, if you look back at lists, and it's hard to do, you got to keep lists and then go back and find who's missing. But if you anybody can do this, and it's pretty consistent across regions that about two out of every three people that go and start in the work, they don't go in and spend their whole lives in the two by two ministry. Now, so what happens to those 66%? And it's one of the things that I knew about but didn't really think about when I was part of the church. I just, assumed that, well, things will work out, right? And learning that it doesn't just work out has been a really hard reality. And, you've interviewed some and their stories are tragic.
Yeah.
And there's so many more that we hear about that they're not even in a place where they could even start to tell the stories like some of them have done with you. So one of the experiences I want to share is that when we created the 501c3, the legal term for a charity in the US, one of the things you have to do is explain why the charity needs to exist, and so that you can get tax deductions for donations. And so I had to put in plain language. For the survivors, it was pretty easy because there was a lot of publicity by then about, that there was a lot of child abuse survivors in the church. And so that part was easy to justify. The second one
Hmm.
was like for former workers. Why is there a need for charity for former workers? And to put it in plain language, how the ministry operates was really shocking. Like it's an exercise everybody should try to do. But basically, you have to explain, well, when they start in the work, they have to give up all their money. And then when they're in the work, they don't actually get paid and they don't actually have any public entitlements paid for them. So things like Social Security and disability insurance and unemployment insurance. And they don't have any ability to save any money because they don't have any money given to them. And any money they do get, they have to basically spend or give back to their overseer at conventions every year. And so then if the overseer decides they don't want them anymore, they can just kick them to the curb, no severance package, nothing. And when I was doing that, once we started the charity, I'd hear about sister workers or brother workers that had been kicked out of the work for various reasons, and then like sometimes they'd be given nothing, or usually maybe a few $1,000s, and good luck, go get a job. And it was like some of them had put in 30 years, and it was around that time I was working at a company. There was a bunch of layoffs happening, and I knew I was a good risk that I'd be laid off. But the severance that we'd get was known, and it was like related to how many years you've been in and a percentage of your salary and so on. And so I knew like if I got laid off, my severance was going to be it was going to be in six figures. And granted, I'm pretty deep in my career, but I'd only been at that company 2.5 years at the point, or not even 2 years. Here I've been put in 2 years of service. I'd been paid the whole time, and this is the world, how they treat people. I was still going to get a very large severance to basically live until I could get my next job and pay my mortgage and so on. And here's somebody that I was working with that had put in 30 years and they were like a few $1,000s. Like it made no sense. Like how is this allowed? How is this possible? If you learned about a company, a corporation that said, "Hey, we'll offer you food, housing, and transportation, but you don't get any salary and you don't get to decide where you go and who you're with, and you can't build up any safety net, and if you leave, you're on your own, you get no severance, and you have no money, and you're not going to have any money, and you're just going to have to rely on public entitlements, or if you figure out how to start a new job." Like all, if you described a company the way the ministry works, you would be like, that can't be allowed. Like that's no way that company, and they can't, like that, they would be shut down immediately. They'd be breaking so many labor laws that they wouldn't be allowed. And yet, because there's so many loopholes, especially in this country, for religion, this is allowed to exist. It's legal to do this to people. Doesn't make it right.
Hmm.
I think it's horribly wrong, but it's
Hmm.
not largely illegal. Some things might be illegal, but it's
Hmm.
a hard case to make because of the freedom of religion. people can do to themselves what they want. Now, the thing about it though is like, the argument would be, well, it's not a company. These are people that have, volunteered to do this. And that's true. That's why it's hard for the government to say, hey, this is not right. You can't operate this way. But and then people in the church, fully believe, as I did, that these are people called by God. So this is God's will for them, right? Like this isn't
Yeah.
just them going to work for a company. This is their life calling. And that's been a fascinating thing to examine as well. There's no way to prove either way if that's true or not. However, we've had people you interviewed and other people that have been public that have spent time in the work who have said that no, I wasn't called by God. I was coerced, psychologically coerced. I was raised in a home and heard all my life growing up that there's billions of people in the world, they're lost out, and especially people that have a lot of empathy, they're going to feel compelled, like I should help these people. I should do something for that for them and be compelled to like the one way to channel that is okay, well, I guess I'll go in the work, especially when they hit an age where they've got to make decisions about what they're going to do with their life. With one of your sister workers I interviewed, and she was like, my life was a story of labor trafficking, human trafficking. How can that be okay? Like I was at an airport a while back and I was looking at a poster of human trafficking, a warning, they have them all over
Hmm.
the airports now. And I was like, I had a sister that was in the work and she was a year in Africa. If I looked at that sign, I could check off 60% of the bullets were true for her. Things like you don't control your money, you don't control who you're with, you depend on the person that you're with for speaking the language because you don't speak the language. You have no way to leave. Like I don't even have a ticket home purchased ahead of time. Like it was just shocking. Like really, like here I've been supporting a ministry that by all these attributes fits the same parameters of the human labor trafficking organization. Like it was mind
Yeah.
bending. And I remember when I started to talk about this on CCF, a lot of people didn't want to hear it. Like this is extreme. Like this is not, that's not the right way to look at it. And I think a lot of that response is like I'm complicit in what happens to people. And to me, I'm actually super passionate about that charter, partly because there's a lot less people aware or want to be aware, like this is what's happening to these people. Like they're literally just tossed out or their health doesn't allow them to
Hmm.
continue and they have to basically figure out how to navigate life forward. And a lot of them are suffering from complex PTSD. It's not like, they're told to go get a job. And it's like, how do you get a job when you can hardly get out of bed? Like, it's just not, and you haven't worked, in a normal job, maybe ever. A lot of them have no education. Their best bet would be a minimum wage job that requires, where they can get some on the job training. And now you've got 10 years till retirement age. It's a controversial thing, and I debated whether I wanted to talk about this. I've thought a lot about John Vandenberg and how he died. John was somebody that was really dear to us, spent a lot of time in our home, and we were super hurt and betrayed by, the news coming out that he had accusations. And so it was very appropriate that he was removed from the work, and he should have been years ago because there were accusations known about him for a long time. On the other hand, how did he die? He died on a roof at the age of 64, doing a kind of work that he hadn't done since he was in his 20s. Why was he even on that roof? Well, he's on the roof because somebody offered him work and he took it because he had no choice. He had no money. He had no savings. Here he is at retirement age and has nothing to really retire on. Like all he can get is
Hmm.
welfare. Try to live on welfare, the amount that you get for welfare. And so that's why he's on a roof. And as a result, he dies. Like, how is that okay as an outcome? Like that, who's responsible for him dying on a roof? Like ultimately, I think that the ministry is culpable because he would not have been on that roof if he was treated like everybody else is in society, where you have at age 64 a way to live moving forward without having to do dangerous work.
Totally. Do you feel like it's fair to say that you would view Bridges and Balm as a way to break that cycle of having no options of how to support yourself, how to gain training, how to break the cycle of leaving the ministry?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things. One of them is that the people that we take in, some of them have aged out. Like they're not going to be able to go back to work. And so we're supporting them indefinitely, subsidizing whatever they need, just basic needs. But one of the most important things for us is that they live in a way that where they feel autonomy, because most of them are also healing from deep wounds, a lot of trauma. And so we want them to be able to heal. And you can't heal if you're subject still dependent on an entity that did the harm in the first place. And
Mhm.
so that's a really important part of our mission is that they have autonomy. They're not dependent on even maybe family that is also maybe been very harmful to them. And so we endeavor to just basically provide an environment that they can heal in. And then the goal, if they're younger, is that they will, because a big part of them feeling empowered and autonomous is that they eventually can be self-sustaining and not dependent on anybody else's charity, including ours. And so that's what we endeavor. And so we have things like sometimes we're helping them with college, returning to school, so, or other types of training. But usually the baseline, we're just trying to get them in a place where they can get to where they can function and even think about their future. And it's a real challenge because, especially with sister workers, but
Mhm.
all workers, they've lived their entire career in the work anyway, where things just happen. The food they're going to eat that night, where they're going to be the next day, especially if they're not the worker that's has the authority in that field. Like every decision is just things just happen. They have food in front of them, they have a bed in front of them, and so they're used to moving through life where the next door opens. But life doesn't actually work that way normally. Like you have to go beat on doors, you have to find opportunities, you have to decide how you want to move forward in life. That you have to take ownership of that. And it's a real big mind switch for them. It's like they tend to think, well, I'll just wait for God to open a door. And maybe that will happen, but that's not generally how life works, right? You go and
Right.
make decisions. And I was talking to a former worker recently where he was telling me that it's like I'm kind of just trying to figure out what God has next, planned for me next. And my response to that was, why would you believe that God doesn't trust you to make decisions for your own life? And he just like, he was just stunned. He's like, I never thought of it that way. It's just remarkable that they've been so ingrained that they have no control over their lives. Every decision is supposed to be made by God. And it's like, how does that even make sense? Like, can you imagine being a parent and your kid's like, every decision I want you to make for me. Your response would be like, go live your life. Like figure out what you want. Like it's not my job as
Mhm.
a parent to make decisions for you. And I get, people making major life decisions and wanting spiritual guidance. But at some point, like you need to trust that maybe God just trusts you. Like why wouldn't you believe that that's okay for you to make
Totally.
decisions?
Totally.
So anyway, that's a challenge. That's a big part of what we do is try to help unwind some of those things and really help them embrace that. Okay, how can you learn that autonomy is a good thing for you with your life, and that's unlearning some things that are very really inhibit them from moving forward.
Do you see the need of the work you're doing as something that is pretty predictable, or you see it growing rapidly, or you see it as kind of tapering off? How do you see the incoming need from where you stand right now?
Yeah, that one's a tough one. I talked about, not stopping the bleeding. In some ways, I'm more optimistic about this number of survivors being reduced because there's a lot more awareness. There's a lot of parents that are like, I'm out, or, where they're just not going to gospel meetings or conventions that they're taking measures to try to make their children safer because they don't feel like the safety has been taken seriously enough. And so that should help reduce survivors going forward. I do worry that because it's more concentrated, like the predators don't seem to be leaving. And so the risks are going up in terms of like there's a smaller population of children for them to go after. So I do worry that maybe it won't be reduced, but in general, I'm a little more optimistic that some of the bleeding on the survivor front is going to get better over time. On the worker front, I'm less optimistic about that because there's no acknowledgement that there's even a problem at all. In fact, it's so ingrained in the ideology, I just don't see any change in behavior at all on that front of like we leave all, like we follow them, Matthew 10, and this is God's word and there's no way we're going to change that. Doesn't matter the outcomes of
Mhm.
that. You know, this is what we do and it's declared from heaven and so we're not going to change. And that's where it's fundamentally at odds with my whole philosophy of like and by the way, it's not my philosophy. Jesus said the same thing. Like, you shall know them by their fruits. Like, what are
Mhm.
the fruits of this ministry, right? 2 out of 3 workers don't end up surviving and then thrown back into society to fend for themselves. Like, that's not a good outcome ratio. Like, it's true on both fronts for Bridges and Baum that it's like neither of these problems have an end until some serious changes are made by the church, which there's no indications that that's going to happen. The need for the charity is going to go on, and that's
Mhm.
a very depressing thing to think about. I tend
Mhm.
not to think about it, but we have talked about
Mhm.
like setting up a legacy. Like some of these people, maybe we'll have to just like raise money so that even if the charity shuts down, that there's trust set up to to make sure they are cared for until
Mm,
they die. But
mhm,
that's a hard problem to solve, and one that we've started
mm,
to think about
mhm,
because there's no effort at all to end the
mhm.
way that this kind of harm. And it's like it's what makes the ministry unique, right? Like it's how they're able to say, hey, we're authentic and these people are sincere because they're giving up all like I just don't see them giving it up because that's such a part of the brand. And it's fascinating, like how do we get here? Like when the fundamental teachings are about fruits and where's the
Yeah.
love? It's baffling.
Mhm.
Like that this charity should not exist. The need for this charity should absolutely not exist. And yet the need is unending. And it's
Yeah.
not like it's new. This charity has been needed for the last 100 years at least. And instead people just withered and were neglected and left destitute. They just suffered.
Mhm.
Its charity shouldn't exist, and yet it always needed to exist.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a profound way to put it because it's so true. And so depressing at the same time. And you don't have to answer this, but I would like to ask how you personally take care of yourself, your own mental health, as you're
Mhm.
up against a problem like this, having removed yourself from the church, yet caring about the humanity over the ideology, caring about the people over the boundaries and the walls that have been built up. How do you take care of your own mental health? How do you heal? How do you move forward and still put so much time and passion into something like this charity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I am in therapy to kind of help process that. So far, none of them recommended that I need to take a break, but that could happen. And I would take that seriously if they felt that way. I'm probably somewhat unique in being able to handle like a lot of people, if you notice, kind of come in waves on CCF and get involved. I've been able to kind of sustain a pace that hasn't burned me out. And like I look at somebody like Cynthia who takes on a lot more than I do and is able to do like, we might just have some differences in how we're built that makes it a little easier to handle. That said, it's still a pretty regular thing where I'll hear stories and it just shell shocked. Like even now, it's like, how is this possible? This person's story is so horrific. And so it's
Mhm.
heavy. It's like I don't need another job. I have two kids I'm raising. I've got a wife. There's busy, active lives, but it's meaningful work. And I feel like to not do something, to not help people when you have the unique ability to help them feels immoral to me. And so that's
Mm,
a challenge. Like I remember talking to somebody just recently and was like, why is this all on us? Like, and I hope that will change over time where there'll be, and there are people that I think are as they are able to heal and that they'll want to step in and help. And we have had a lot more of that lately where we've grown our board and there's a lot more people involved. It feels a lot more sustainable at this point.
good. Yeah. So much of what you're saying resonates so deeply because it feels like such a mammoth task. Like you say, that shouldn't even have to be a task. This should have been taken care of all along. None of this harm should have happened in the first place. And yet I feel so much reverence, so much thankfulness, so much appreciation for figures like yourself and Cynthia and others who have stood in to fill those gaps because the work that the community is doing at large to try to mitigate some of the harm is really commendable and really amazing, and I just thank you for the work. I know it goes unrecognized so many times. Nobody's getting paid enough for what they're doing and the work they're putting in. So man, thank you for what you've done just on the behalf of the community.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. And there's a lot of people that their response has been incredible, and so many people that I admire that have stepped up. And
Mm.
I just feel like being on the right side of history is important to me, and feels very clearly that's where we're at here.
So a lot of the work that you're doing is incredible. However, what can we do as a community to help stand in the gap for some of these problems?
So yeah, charities can only do so much, and really like we're doing some tactical things, but helping with volunteer hours or donations is great, and then we really appreciate that, and that enables us to do what we do. I think the broader problem that I really want people to think about is that a lot of times the people we're helping are people or you've known at some point. Maybe we're not in contact with them, but it's a small community in a lot of ways. You probably at least heard them speak when it comes to former workers, and when it comes to survivors, same thing. good chance you've been in fellowship with a lot of them. Like one of the things that I remember hearing a lot about on survivors is like, well, I don't know any, I don't know any survivors. There's no survivors in my meeting. And for me, when I was publicly advocating for survivors, I would hear stories all the time from survivors. Like I was a safe person to share with. And if you're not hearing about survivors, it's probably that's the reason that you're not perceived as someone safe to tell. But when it comes to former workers, like you know who they are. They've been on the list and they're not on the list anymore. And so it's pretty easy to identify who you know who might be in this situation. And might be out of the work 20 years. They're still struggling and they may not show it, may not be obvious, but they may just be barely getting by. They may be deeply in debt. But even then, like not even the financial side, just letting them know that, hey, are you okay? Like, I'm interested in your story. I want to be there for you and understand and care and like help you if you still need to heal. I want to be someone that is empathetic and makes you feel like somebody has your back in that experience.
Mhm.
And so just doing that is, like that's what you'd expect of a community that cares about you. Like you did an interview a while back. I think it was actually on a live call. I don't know if it was recorded, but she was saying that she was just realized nobody cared, or that she felt anyway that just nobody cared about her, and it sent her into this deep spiral of depression. And I was thinking, wow,
Mhm.
how tragic is that? You're in this community that defines itself and sees itself as loving one another. And yet here's this worker that exists that doesn't feel that at all. And so what I did after hearing that is I sent a letter to not everybody on this California staff, but everybody that was younger and you're not in a position of authority. And I said, hey, like I do care. My care for you is unconditional. It doesn't matter what you're struggling with. And if you ever need anything, if you need somebody to talk to, I'm here for you. I was still going to meetings at the time, but it's towards the end. And so I was already had sent some letters to staff, so I was already a controversial character. The response back I got, not very many, but some came back and said like, you don't know how much that means to me. And it told me like they feel that too. Like they just don't feel cared for because they live in a world that's just really a bubble that's so much artificial. They have to put on this face. They can't be real. They can't be vulnerable. They can't share their stuff
Mhm.
struggles with people because it's got to look a certain way. And as a result, they're really lonely and they don't feel cared for. And like you can remedy that. Everybody has the ability to reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, I care about you unconditionally," and that will help solve the problem.
Oh, that is such wisdom. Thank you. That gives me a lot of passion to be that person. So thank you. Thanks for this call and for the energy you put in. Man, you're doing good work.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany.